Your home is where you should feel the safest. It's your sanctuary. Buying a home is usually the largest purchase anyone will make in their life. Over time, it collects trophies and mementos, being decorated and renovated until it's almost an extension of ourselves. When we're unsure of the security of our environment, we tend to go home where we believe we're safe. Sometimes, though, trouble comes knocking. On September 20th, 1995, at about 8 p.m., Bruce Hansen was driving down Fish Creek Road in Lava Hot Springs, Idaho, when he suddenly stopped his truck. Standing in the road in front of him was a female African lion. He watched as the lion sauntered off to the edge of the road and disappeared into the woods. Clearly, African lions, or any lions for that matter, are not native to southeast Idaho. There wasn't a local zoo that she had broken out of. No, this lion, along with 44 others, belonged to a couple named Robert Fieber and Dottie Martin. Robert Fieber, who went by Bob, grew up in Toledo, Oregon, about 7 miles east of Newport on the coast. As an adult, he moved to Siletz, Oregon, which is about 9 miles north. He worked as a delivery driver for his family's gasoline distribution business. He had a 10-acre farm where he first raised the fawn of a black-tailed doe that had been killed by a car on the highway. Then he brought some fallow deer to the property. At the beginning of 1977, some people in Milton Freewater, a town in northern Oregon, just south of the border with Washington State and pretty far to the east, gave Bob a lion. This first lion, ironically named Tiger, was a female and would be the only declawed big cat Bob would ever own, because it's a lion. Unless you're going to also detooth the lion, what's the point? The lion, named Tiger, was actually kinda like a dog. She would ride around in the cab of Bob's gasoline delivery truck with him during the day. A few months later, Bob bought a male lion from someone in Portland. Bob used this lion, named Muhammad, to breed with Tiger, and just like that, Bob was breeding lions in Oregon and the United States. Seems like becoming a lion breeder with zero experience should be much more difficult, but here we are. Apparently, Portland, Oregon is just chock full of people who own lions as pets because in 1977, an 8-month-old female lion was wandering the streets of northeast Portland. Again, this lion had not escaped from a zoo or any other type of official animal shelter. This lion, named Jeremilla, was owned by Frank Morales Jr. and lived with him at a house on Northeast 9th Avenue, just north of Broadway. After frightening several neighbors and a few businesses, animal control were able to tranquilize Jeremilla and take her to an animal shelter. It seemed that neighbors had been lodging complaints regarding the lion for months. It was technically against the law to keep an exotic pet in the city of Portland without a permit, but animal control had instructions not to enforce the law. Outside of that, the lion was chained up and looked healthy, so there were no grounds to remove the lion from the home. Multnomah County and Mr. Morales agreed that it would be best to find Jeremilla a new home, and Bob agreed to come pick her up. Now Bob had 2 female lions he could breed with Mohammed. This new venture began to consume all of Bob's time. Bob was twice divorced and had 3 children, 2 boys, Mark and Mike, and a daughter, Monica. They would say in later interviews that they felt like their father cared more about his lions than he did for them. Mike had part of his ear taken off by one of the big cats, but he himself raised an orphaned bear. He would have joined Bob in Idaho later, but he unfortunately lost his life while working as an Alaskan fisherman in 1993. Dottie Martin was from Michigan, and after marrying F. Ronald Martin, the couple moved to Waldport on the Oregon coast where they owned a service station. The two divorced in 1977, and Dottie acquired the service station in the divorce. Bob met Dottie when he delivered gasoline to her service station, and after being introduced to Tiger, she also fell in love with big cats. Bob and Dottie turned the 10-acre farm into the Siletz Game Farm and began collecting animals at a rapid pace. By the end of the 70s, they had over 150 animals, including 4 Bengal tigers, 21 African lions, a jaguar, 12 wolves, 2 cougars, 2 bears, plus buffalo, elk, deer, and antelope. Bob and Dottie got a license from the U.S. Department of Agriculture under the Animal Welfare Act to charge admission for people to view the animals and also to sell exotic animals. This didn't mean that the quote-unquote game farm was a properly run animal organization. One of the bears had to have a leg amputated because it had been mauled by some of the captive wolves. Then, both bears escaped. One ended up in a neighbor's yard where it was shot and killed. The other bear, the one with only 3 legs, was never found. Neighbors of the game farm would continually report that elk, deer, and antelope would continually disappear and that they believed that Bob was feeding them to the lions. These claims were never proven, but Bob rarely had enough money to feed all of the animals. In 1982, the Department of Agriculture voluntarily suspended Bob and Dottie's license. They were no longer allowed to charge admission to their game farm and couldn't sell the animals, but it didn't bar them from keeping exotic animals on the property. In May of 1984, the Department of Agriculture inspected the game farm and produced a report that claimed the conditions of the facility were deplorable. They said that the animals lacked proper food and water, the cages were poorly built and not secure, and the animals were living in their own fecal matter. In September of 1984, the Oregon State Police arrived at the Siletz game farm with a warrant to search the property. They were accompanied by 20 police officers and officials from the Humane Society. After searching the property, they charged Bob with 15 counts of animal cruelty based on the treatment of a jaguar, a bobcat, a raccoon, and an elk. He was also charged with holding wildlife without a permit, keeping animals in an improper holding facility, and illegal keeping of wild animals. During the subsequent legal battles, Oregon passed new laws pertaining to owning exotic animals. By 1986, Bob was ordered to divest himself of his animals. He put the animals in Dottie's name and began looking for a new property in Idaho, where exotic animal laws were virtually non-existent. In July of 1986, Bob went to a real estate office in Clearwater, Idaho. Clearwater is in the northern part of Idaho, and it's not close to anything. Bob was interested in a 160-acre property that was for sale in the area, and he was interested in trading his Siletz property for it. The realtor went to Oregon to look at the property in Siletz, but no deal had been made when Bob took it upon himself to begin occupying the land in Clearwater. He put up a tent for himself and started building cages, filling them with exotic animals. There were no contracts, no agreements. Bob had just taken over the property. It wasn't long before neighbors were feeling the effects of Bob's poor construction regarding the cages. On July 19, 1986, the cows on a neighboring farm came charging in from the pasture, broke through a fence, and all huddled in the barn. They refused to come out. The following day, another neighbor, James Brotnov, was working with his horses, and when he released them, they refused to run into the field. As James was looking around, he saw a female lion by the barn, crouched and ready to pounce. He ran inside and grabbed his Model 94 Winchester 30-30, and when he got back outside, he fired a round which hit the lion in the shoulder. The cat was down but still moving, so James fired 3 more rounds just to make sure. When another neighbor heard the news about the rogue lion, he went to check on his cattle and found one dead, having been mauled on the hind end, and the calf she had been feeding was gone. Bob had been back in Oregon trying to settle business at the Siletz property, and when he returned to Idaho, he was irate that one of his lions had been shot. He claimed that this lion was one of his best and would have never gone after a human being or someone else's property. Even if that's true, which seems unlikely, it's a lion. If you're on your farm in Idaho and a lion shows up, it shouldn't be unexpected for you to shoot it. This also wasn't the only lion that Bob and Dottie lost while in Clearwater. On top of the lion that was shot, 4 more lions died on the property. One was killed by a rattlesnake bite, one from pneumonia, one from a severe infection, and the last one died of unknown causes. When a spring on the property dried up, Bob realized that he wouldn't have a free water source for his animals, and he lost interest in the property. They had been there for less than a month, and on July 31st, Bob and Dottie packed up their animals and removed them from Clearwater. Bob managed to convince the owner of the Osgood Zoo in Osgood, Idaho, to temporarily house 3 lions. Of course, Bob ended up bringing 14 lions, and the arrangement wasn't as temporary as Bob had made it seem. The situation eventually boiled over, and the couple were no longer welcome at the zoo. This happened just in time for Bob to acquire another property by less than reputable methods. Lava Hot Springs is a town in the southeast corner of Idaho. In October of 1986, Harvey Davis was struggling to pay the extra mortgage on a property he owned on Fish Creek Road, just south of the Lava Hot Springs city limits. It was a 5-acre property and it had a 24-foot by 48-foot mobile home on it. It didn't take long before Bob and Dottie showed up and offered to buy the property. They offered a $5,000 down payment right then, another $5,000 in January, and one more $5,000 payment in April, followed by monthly payments that would pay off the remaining balance. Harvey was desperate to sell the property and he agreed. Bob and Dottie quickly took over the property and filled it with makeshift cages. They immediately moved in their 14 big cats and 6 wolves, but that number quickly grew. Bob began crossbreeding the lions with tigers, which is where the compound eventually got its title, Ligertown. A liger is specifically the breeding of a male lion with a female tiger. A male tiger bred with a female lion is called a tigon. I'm not making this up. A liger's appearance is similar in color to a lion, but with muted stripes. The unique genetics make the animals grow to be giant, up to 900 pounds. A cat the size of a small cow. This is why, when Bob and Dottie failed to make any other payments on the property, the bank wasn't able to evict the couple. They defaulted on the loan, which caused the utilities to be shut off, but when they presented eviction paperwork to the sheriff, he told them it couldn't be done. In order to foreclose the property, the bank would have to pay to care for the animals that were being housed there. The bank determined that the cost of caring for that many exotic animals was more than the property was worth, so they cut their losses. Bob Feber had once again found himself a property that he didn't have to pay for. Bob and Dottie knew they couldn't afford to pay for the property as they couldn't even afford to feed the animals they had. The couple relied on handouts to maintain Ligertown. Once or twice a week, Bob would go to a local poultry farm and take as many cold chickens that he could. A cold chicken is one that doesn't produce many eggs, if any, and are not as valuable to the farm. He would cram as many dead chickens into his Chevy Suburban as he could, even piling them on top, not caring that they would continually fall off on his trip home. He would take scraps from the local butcher and put a sign up outside his property that read, "Animal Drop-Off," encouraging people to drop off roadkill that he could use to feed his animals. As the years passed, the compound began overflowing with animals. Bob and Dottie had 45 big cats and 44 wolf and wolf hybrids at Ligertown by the time the compound reached the end of its life. At first, people in the area paid little attention to the property filled with exotic animals. Neighbors started off friendly, but as time passed, the compound became a nuisance and Bob burned every bridge that he once crossed. When he talked about opening a petting zoo, one resident gave him some geese that she had been caring for. Soon, she caught him feeding the geese to his lions. When one neighbor had some of his livestock killed by a wolf that had gotten loose, he shot and killed it. Bob then filed a lawsuit against the neighbor. By 1995, the area around Ligertown had become a conflict zone where neighbors feared what animal would be lurking around their property, eating their livestock, and Bob filed numerous lawsuits against anybody who said anything negative about him, Dottie, or the animals on his compound. When Bruce Hansen saw a full-grown African lion standing in the middle of the road, he knew where it had come from, and honestly, he wasn't surprised. People in the area were sure this day would come. On April 1st, just months earlier, the news reported that lions had escaped from the Ligertown game farm and were roaming the streets of Lava Hot Springs. This was just an April Fool's joke, though it turned out to be horribly timed. Bruce raced home and grabbed his rifle, dialed 911 and said, "The Ligertown cats are loose." As he came to the end of his property, his ex-mother-in-law, Lavina Long, had just arrived so she could feed her goats. As the headlights of Bruce's truck flashed by her truck, he saw the lion crouched in the brush near the woman. Bruce got out of the truck and yelled at Lavina, but she didn't hear him. His shouting got the attention of the lion and she jumped at him. He raised his rifle and fired a shot. The lion ran from the property and into the woods. Bruce followed the big cat and he heard it thrashing around before it finally fell over dead. After Bruce arrived back on the street near Ligertown, Deputy Tom Foltz arrived at the scene. Deputy Foltz was accompanied by Idaho fish and game biologist Barbara Slott, who he had just happened to pull over for a faulty taillight when he received the call about the escaped lions. Soon, a large male lion strolled onto the road and just stood there, staring at the three of them. After a moment, it started walking away from them. Deputy Foltz got on the radio requesting a SWAT team, and Bruce looked up and saw Bob standing on top of the animal cages. When Bob climbed down off of the roof and approached the three standing in the road, the male lion turned around and started walking back towards them. Bruce said he assumed that Bob would corral the lion back onto his property, but instead he told the deputy to shoot it. By this time, Deputy Andy Thomas had arrived on scene and he had a deer rifle with him, so he took a shot at the big cat. It started thrashing around and Deputy Foltz shot him again. Then the lion ran into the woods. They didn't chance chasing a wounded lion in the woods and figured they would find the body in the morning. Eventually, the area was flooded with sheriff's deputies and they began the process of figuring out what the situation was and how many animals had escaped the compound. Bruce Hansen was done dealing with lions for the night, so he went home. Barbara Slott's job did not entail dealing with full-grown African lions, so she also left the scene. Both Bob and Dottie had been bitten by lions prior to the escape. When deputies entered the compound, there were big cats still loose inside and a number of them were shot and killed. Despite protests, Bob and Dottie were both taken to the hospital to be treated for their wounds. As authorities surveyed the site, they noted the horrendous conditions. Some of the cats couldn't walk because their feet were deformed. Their cages were covered in feces, feathers, and the bones from animal carcasses. A helicopter with a thermal camera located most of the roaming cats, which were still near Ligertown. Spending most of their lives in tiny cages most likely stinted their instinct to hunt. Unfortunately, all of the big cats that were outside of the compound were shot and killed. The following day, the schools were closed and residents were advised to stay inside until authorities could confirm that all of the escaped lions had been accounted for. At about 8 p.m. that evening, one last lion walked out of the woods onto the road below the compound. One deputy fired a shot from a rifle that hit it in the shoulder and it began to charge them. The other deputy unloaded a shotgun which got the lion to turn and run back into the woods. When they searched the area, they found the body of the lion that the deputies had shot the previous evening. A little further into the trees lay the lion that they had just shot. That would be the last of the 17 big cats that were shot and killed over the course of 24 hours in Lava Hot Springs, Idaho. The remaining 27 big cats were taken from the compound and sent to the Wildlife Way Station in Southern California. The 44 wolf and wolf hybrids were taken to Werewolves Rescue west of Phoenix, Arizona. Bob and Dottie were barred from returning to the compound. Now, if you paid attention, you'll know that I cited earlier that there were 45 big cats at Ligertown, but 17 dead cats plus 27 remaining cats only adds up to 44. What happened to the last big cat? Well, it was still on the loose. Bob was asked if all the cats were accounted for, and he said yes. But he wasn't what you would call a meticulous person, and was off by one. On September 28th at about 7 p.m., Woney Peters looked out the window to see that his horses were acting spooked. He told his kids to come inside and watch the tree line like a hawk. Soon, he saw a male lion popping in and out of the woods. He grabbed a 7mm rifle, and the next time the lion appeared, he squeezed off a round. He wasn't sure if he hit the cat, but he called 911 to let them know what happened. When deputies arrived, they searched the woods and found the animal crouched by a tree. They shot him again and killed him. Bob and Dottie were both initially charged with 107 misdemeanors, but it was eventually reduced to 16 counts. Of course, according to them, this was all one big conspiracy to shut down Ligertown. Bob claimed that someone had intentionally cut the fence to let the lions out in order to have a reason to rid the area of his game farm. He also claimed that the last lion to be killed, dubbed the schoolyard lion, had actually been killed a week prior and planted to create more fear in the area. None of those claims were ever proven. Bob and Dottie were found guilty of 13 out of the 16 charges, and Bob was sentenced to 1 year in jail, while Dottie was sentenced to 6 months. They both were given 7.5 years of probation. They were also given 250 hours of community service and were prohibited from having custody of any animals or being an employee of an organization that had custody of animals. Though it's likely that that detail only applies to the state of Idaho, the conditions of their parole made them unable to leave the state without permission. Bob and Dottie reported to jail on April 23, 1996, but on May 3rd it was determined that they could remain free on bail while their appeal was reviewed. Then they got permission to move to Oregon, agreeing to return if their appeal was denied. Surprise, surprise, when their appeal was denied in August of 1998, they never returned. Who would have thought these people who never honored any agreement they ever made would skip out on this one? Bob and Dottie were arrested in Oregon in 1999, but authorities in Idaho refused to extradite them and they were then released. As of 2002, Bob Fieber and Dottie Martin were living in Oregon, where Bob was driving a casino shuttle bus and restoring old cars. It looked as though they had no more lions, just 3 small alligators that lived in a large terrarium. So, no matter where you are, whether it's the African savanna or the woods of the Pacific Northwest, keep watching the tree line, because you never know what might be watching you back. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.